Today we're excited to start out our series of replacing your kitchen staples with fresh milled flour recipes. So our first one we're going to tackle is a biscuit. We want to replace that canned biscuit, the Grands, the flaky Pillsbury biscuits with something comparable but made out of fresh milled flour. So one thing you'll learn about my recipes, and I know sometimes it's a hard transition to using a scale and weighing your ingredients, but here's an example of why we do that. So on my recipe, you'll see that it's 240 grams or 2 cups of fresh milled soft white wheat flour. So a lot of times people are looking at these new recipes thinking, is that 2 cups of wheat berries or is that 2 cups of flour? So the good news is 240 grams of soft white wheat flour is made from 240 grams of soft white wheat berries. So it eliminates the question of whether or not a recipe is written for the flour measurement or the grain measurement. So we're going to go ahead and measure out, zero out our scale. We're going to measure out weigh out 240 grams of soft white wheat berries. And the cool thing is after I mill it in my Nutri-Mill grain mill, I'll show you that it's still 240 grams of flour. So most times on my grain mill, I always want it to give me the finest flour, which is going to be the slowest feed rate, but the fastest motor speed. So I always have this turn as far to the left as possible, which is your fastest motor speed. And then your slowest feed rate is going to be this first one. Okay, so just finished milling our 240 grams of soft white wheat flour. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to zero out that measuring cup on my scale. And as you can see on the Nutri-Mill Classic, this is a very fine flour. I also have the Wonder Mill, and I have both of these so that I always have a backup if something were to go out or something were to go wrong with one of my mills. So I do believe that the Nutri-Mill Classic has a finer flour on the finest setting. So now I'm going to put this back in this measuring cup just simply to show you that 240 grams of wheat berries equates to 240 grams of flour. There is also a difference, fresh milled flour that is, if you were to measure it right after milling it, it's a little bit fluffier and more aerated than flour that maybe you leave in a jar or something on your counter for a couple of days. So that's why I like to weigh my ingredients versus measuring in a dry measuring cup, because there's no variation in weights or in masses. So I'll take this off of here and show y'all. 240 grams of flour is 240 grams of wheat. Okay, now when I'm doing something like our biscuit recipe, I do want to let the flour cool off just for a little bit, because I am going to add cold butter to it. So we don't want that butter that we've worked hard to keep cold and create the chunks in the butter or in the biscuit, which is what makes it a flaky biscuit. We don't want the warm flour to warm that butter up. So I've got my flour and my butter both in the freezer for just a few minutes to get everything nice and cold. Okay, now that our flour and our butter are cold, I'm ready to get started mixing my biscuit. Okay, so we're gonna put our flour into our bowl. We're gonna do 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. And I didn't want to pre-measure anything out. I want to show you guys, other than getting my ingredients all in this area, I'm doing everything as quick or as close to real time as possible so that you can see that you really are able to make these recipes in about the amount of time it would take to go to the store and buy a can of biscuits, get home, take them out of the can. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process to replace some of these recipes. Then we're going to do a teaspoon of salt. I like to use the Redmond's real salt. Get all the good minerals in there. Teaspoon of salt. I'm going to kind of stir that around just to get it incorporated, because once I add my butter, I don't want to over mix this. That's how you lose those flaky layers that you're used to with like a Grand's biscuit. Okay, next we're going to do 1 cup of Greek yogurt. You can use kefir if you want to do like a plain kefir yogurt. You can use sour cream if you want. I really love using Greek yogurt and getting all of that awesome protein to go alongside all of the nutrients you're going to get from the fresh milled flour. This really makes a pretty nutrient packed meal. So for this particular brand of Greek yogurt, for 2/3 of a cup, you're getting 16 grams of protein. So in this recipe total, you're going to get over 20 grams of protein just by adding the Greek yogurt, not including the protein that comes that you get from fresh milled flour, because there is a significant amount of protein in whole grains as well. Okay, now I'm ready. I went ahead and you want to get all of your flour incorporated with that Greek yogurt. Again, once you add your butter, you don't want to over mix it so that you don't lose those flaky layers in a biscuit. So I'm going to use, it's a 1/4 cup, which is half a stick of butter. So I'm going to, I can kind of visualize where our halfway mark is here. And anytime I'm doing like pie crust or anything that I really want flaky layers in, I'm going to use my cheese grater and I'm going to grate frozen butter into my recipe. This really helps keep the texture of both like a biscuit or a pie crust, I'm sorry. So I got down to that halfway mark. And this is just for my family, so I'm going to be using my clean hands to mix this all together. I've also got a pastry cutter here, so I will kind of use a little bit of both of those things. I do use a pastry cutter for some things, but I don't mind using my hands either. All right, like I said, we want to make sure that we do not overwork this butter. I want to see some light yellow chunks in my biscuit dough as I'm finished with this. So we're really just working it till it's into a dough ball, and I can still see some of those butter chunks. I don't want to overwork it. So now that's all I'm doing, is mixing it just enough. Okay, now I've just put it out on my silicone Silpat mat here. I always have in my freezer all of my extra flour that I mill, and I keep that for things like this. If I need to flour my surface at all, I will just grab a little handful of that flour and sprinkle it on top. This really seems like I don't need that for these biscuits. Now, I like to keep my biscuits tall. Don't roll them out too thin. So this is probably 3/4 of an inch, between half and 3/4 of an inch thick. So I'm going to grab this 2.5 inch round cutter. I don't have a good biscuit cutter. I'm in the market for one of those if anybody has a good one they love. I've also used mason jar lids which is the perfect size, and it's easy to press out of the top. So I'm just going to cut these out really quick, and then I'll show you how I put them in my buttered skillet to bake off. You want to make sure when you gather up the scraps of your biscuits that the biscuit dough, that you don't overwork it. You just want to press that dough back together so that it's pieced together enough to where you can cut out a couple more biscuits. So don't knead it or overwork it, or you'll lose those flaky layers of butter in there. I'm going to grab about a tablespoon of this butter and put it into a cast iron skillet. Get it just warm enough to melt, and then we'll bake our biscuits in that. Okay, we've got our butter just barely melted. You don't want it super hot. I don't want to burn the bottom of my biscuits. So we got 6 biscuits and then an extra little guy that I'll put in the middle here. So this is, I think, my 8-inch cast iron. So I want to get these in here as close together as possible so that when I want them to rise up, not spread out. So I'm going to put these in a 375 oven and bake them for 10 to 12 minutes. Okay, while my biscuits are baking, my kids love a good honey butter biscuit. Even if we're doing like a sausage sandwich or a sausage and an egg sandwich, they still love that honey butter glaze. So I'm going to take 2 more tablespoons of my butter, 2 tablespoons of this honey. We try to find some local honey as best we can. I'm going to put that in my small cast iron skillet and just warm it up just to melt it. I don't want it to caramelize and get crystals in there or anything from caramelization. I just want it melted, and we're going to glaze the top as soon as I pull the biscuits from the oven. Okay, I just pulled my biscuits out of the oven, and I melted my honey and butter on the stove. Like I said, I just want it warm enough to melt both the butter and the honey together and combine those. I don't want to let it boil or anything, or it'll kind of crystallize. So now I'm just going to, as I pulled this out and while it's good and hot, I'm going to put this honey butter glaze over the top. So one other question I get all the time is, I don't want to bake from scratch because I'm going to have too many dishes. So here are the number of dishes I have to wash. I guess I do have my rolling pin here too. So again, it doesn't take that much more time than opening a can of biscuits from the grocery store. You're going to get a ton of nutrients from the fresh milled flour, lots of good protein from the Greek yogurt. And I do find that my kids stay, and myself included, we stay fuller longer from all of the fiber and the nutrients in the flour. So throw an egg or some sausage on these and make a little breakfast sandwich, and you will stay full for the whole morning.